it's Donna from Enchanted, doing the Q&A as promised. Thanks so much for emailing in with this, Susan. I do appreciate it. It's quite a complex question. So for a start, you are struggling with a bed that doesn't get any sun. That's fine. There are lots and lots of plants that don't need the sun. You say you're battling Yorklets clay. Now, I would just say, as I've said for feels like hundreds of years to hundreds of people, I know clay is difficult, but that's what we've got. There is nothing wrong with heavy clay. I was on heavy agricultural clay for over 30 years at Sonoma. I'm now in Yorklets and I'm still on heavy agricultural clay. Unless you're in an allotment situation, you will be, if you live in Whitstable, Herne Bay, Canterbury, on very heavy clay. The reason people say, oh, it's clayey, oh, it's horrible, I can't do anything with it. I know it's a battle. Generally, the window of being able to dig, fork, do anything with clay, plant, transplant, you've got a very small window in an ideal world where our seasons aren't too wet, aren't too dry, no drought, no flooding. And of course one of the major problems with clay is that it doesn't drain. So you can have quite a bit of surface water. Now there's nothing more soggy than clay it's very difficult to weed heavy clay, because as your trowel goes in to remove the roots system of whatever it is you're trying to get out, the clay will stick to it. It becomes sticky. Whereas in Faversham, mostly, you're dealing with a clay that you can always hand fork, hand dig, or standard fork or spade dig. It crumbles, it doesn't retain the moisture, so it's obviously so much more easier. Clay is perfectly fertile. Generally, it doesn't lean towards acidity or alkalinity. Maybe one or two are its normal pH towards acidity. We still get really good results with rhododendrons and camellias in clay. So please don't do what a lot of people moving into the area do, which is assume they need to spend thousands and thousands of pounds importing topsoil. If you put topsoil on top of clay, you will simply be lying to the plants, to my mind. They're in clay. The fact that they have a whale of a time and really get away to a good start because they're in friable loam imported from God knows where, just means that when their root systems do eventually meet the clay, they are in no condition with their vigour and their growth to cope with it. It's much better to put a young plant in heavy clay and watch it thrive, because that's the chance and opportunity for it to thrive. If you do put acres and acres of topsoil onto all your borders, it will simply sit on top of the clay. It doesn't really help. My personal opinion is it doesn't help. It's a waste of money. So that deals with the clay for you. The wet weather, we're underwater. I still haven't mowed the pasture for the first time yet, even. It is virtually impossible for a number of people who Ladybirds Gardens for. We haven't even given them their first mow yet. It's impossible. Overshadowed by hanging trees, don't worry, there are lots of things that will grow there. Now you say that the trees are in a pretty bad state, left to wild and not managed in any way, despite being in a dangerous state. Now, if I could just cover that. Okay, so if somebody else owns trees outside of your boundary, fence or hedge, whatever it is, you cannot take them down. You don't know if they have a TPO, which is a tree preservation order on them, so you have to be very careful. But if they're overhanging, they're overhanging. A tree of any size and description will be drinking and taking gallons and gallons and gallons, I don't know the exact figures, but gallons every day to support its root structure. As above, so below. You look at the overall height and shape of the tree above ground, you have exactly the same below ground as a root structure, apart from conifers, which is very wide and shallow. So if these trees are, for example, silver birch, oak, mature field maple, something like that, rural Yorklets does have that kind of tree species in it, or conifers. For a start, it will be mitigating the excess water. If you say it's, I don't know if the area that you'd like to plant beneath the canopy of the trees is overly wet or dry, so your trees will change that situation. All I can suggest is that you are able to completely remove on your side, if this is your boundary, and I've got branches coming over like that, this is the line that you can take that back to. Now you can do that with, please don't pick up a chainsaw, Susan, please don't. You can saw them off, you can use extendable loppers, ratchet loppers, and you can remove all this from your garden whilst keeping the tree as it is, because it doesn't belong to you, in situ. So first of all, I'd recommend what I say when I take the lower branches off. What I'm doing in a tree situation is I've got my branch, I've got my tree, and I've got the trunk. By just cutting off and making the trunk a clear trunk, you are increasing the light and the availability for planting space below that tree. So if you can, no matter what dangerous state these trees are in, take off the branches as high as you can within reason from your boundary line. That will give you clear planting space. If the trees are taking all the moisture to fulfill their life, you are going to need to always water that border, no matter what you put in it. If you newly plant perennials or shrubs, even in a perfect situation, with no drought issues, you have to support the perennials and the shrubs for their first year with water. I can't stress that enough. So whatever you plant for the first year to 18 months, even if we have rain, as we have had, I need you to water, or they simply won't stand a chance of becoming established. The other thing you might find within this overhang of trees for planting is a significant root system. So you will be very short of actual room and planting spaces to get anything in. You can go one of two ways with this. You can top it up with a well-rotted mulch, or farmyard manure, which I would recommend that you buy from a nursery or garden centre or me. because the manure that the stables offers for free carries weed seeds. So what you're doing is you're actually importing weeds that you don't already have, and God help you if you import ground elder or Himalayan balsam or something like that. Basically, you don't know what seeds are still viable and carried within that manure because you don't know where the ponies are grazing. So that can be a bit dodgy. So get a mulch on, build the soil up a little. Don't put compost on it under any circumstances. You would be much better off putting on a mulch, even if it was wood chip that's gone mulchy, as long as it's not, as long as it's more of a shredded material than the individual chips, and build your soil up that way. If you find you've got no planting spaces, you're going to have to just sow seeds and hope that something starts to self-seed within that, and that would be communal garden, normal annual plants that just pop up all over the place. So we've raised the canopy, I've talked to you about irrigation. If it is a wild area, your choices are, these are just a few clues. If it's a wild area that you intend to look wild and to be perhaps more nature conscious and not formal as a border, you could use, I would get in woodland anemones. They can be bought. Don't ever buy them in pots because they won't be the anemones that the garden centres and nurseries sell. These are completely different. These are the woodland anemones that are covering the whole floor of the Blean, including, you know, all areas of the Blean. It is a vast forest, and that is in the form of, it's like a little cormy bulb. You can put in, also you could put in winter aconite, which again is a little bulb, and these are ground covering, bright and cheerful. They're for the pollinators, really lovely plants. You could try and include something like sweet woodruff, and that would be a specialist buy from a wildflower nursery. Also things like barrenwort, which is a wild form of epimedium, that's going to do well there. Bluebells, you know, Ladybirds has gardens where bluebells are everywhere and we are always digging them out. I think as long as you concentrate and make sure that you don't knowingly buy Spanish bluebells. So that would mean you would need to buy bluebells in the green, which are available, and coming up, you know, now. If this is a garden situation and not a wild plot, I would recommend the following. We've got Aquilegia, some hardy geraniums. They can be of varying sizes. They don't mind shade at all, unless it specifically says that they will only thrive in sunlight. Most of them will make quite a good job of growing in a shaded situation. Don't override on periwinkle. Periwinkle is Vinca minor and Vinca major. It's a spreading, very thick, creeping plant that can cover a bank situation. It's invaluable. I had Vinca minor Gertrude Jekyll, which is a beautiful purple colour, and that's really nice. Some of them have a variegated leaf, which will give you a contrast in the shade. Hellebores, Erythronium, often overlooked. And then I remember under a specific tree, my Gladitsia at Sonoma, I planted Persicaria bistorta, which is a member of the, oh, what family is that a member of? Persicaria is a knotweed, family, but not the knotweed that we all have to report if ever we find it, of the Japanese variety. And I put Persicaria golden arrow, which has a lovely lime green foliage underneath the tree. And as long as I supported that quite heavily with water for the first 2 years, it got its feet in spite of a situation where it was amongst lots and lots of root system from the tree. And it really started to establish, and then it started to carpet really nicely. So those are a few pointers for you. Also, bugle and blue bugle, which is Ajuga purpurescens, I think it is. It's a purple leaf bugle. That's quite nice for getting over the ground. And the last thing that popped into my head and popped out again really quickly was, no, it's gone. I'll have to come back to you on that. So that's it, Susan. That's all I can suggest for you. I hope I've been helpful. Any more questions, please let me know, and I'll get back to you. Right, so the first thing I'd like to say, Jenny, is look at the housing development overall. Everyone in your block, whether you're detached or semi-detached, whatever you are, because everything that is successful and can be successful will be alive and looking okay in the same, facing the same aspect that you are. So that will give you a clue as to what is going to be okay for you. Secondly, the thing that will counteract that is the fact that developers have no clue, no understanding and no sensitivity towards anything really, apart from building houses. So they have, believe it or not, a ridiculous list which they're given, and all they have to do is order 5,000 of those, 2,000 of those, and it just ticks all the boxes, and that's the way life works. So I will never recommend that you ever plant phormium, which we see everywhere in these new developments. People who move in tend to think that they're tropical and lovely, and they're actually vile. No use whatsoever, really shouldn't be here, because they are a nuisance once they start to grow, which is just the way of a plant. You plant it, it needs to grow, it needs to go through its life cycle, and if all it does is develops into 15 feet by 15 feet, that's what it's here to do, and that's not suitable for a front garden. So I wouldn't necessarily suggest that you ever plant anything like that. I also, if it is a small front garden, northwest facing, I wouldn't suggest that you try and have a tree, because small front gardens can become completely overwhelmed, as you saw from my magnolia post, by what you buy as a tiny magnolia tree that develops into covering the whole house, and taking out even more light from the front of the house. So the first thing I'd do is check on all your neighbours and see what's growing for them. Shrubs, I think everybody always prefers to have something evergreen, and that's not necessarily going to give balance as far as looking after nature is concerned. If you mix evergreen with deciduous shrubs, which are shrubs that lose their leaves, you will end up with a reasonable balance. Not that evergreen shrubs don't flower and are very valuable for their flowers. They are, and their berries. It's just that you do need balance. You can't have a completely evergreen garden. Nature doesn't work that way, and unfortunately I'm the gardener that says gardening doesn't work that way either. We cannot achieve perfection. We need balance. So shrubs that are going to do well for you are Elaeagnus, tamarisk, griselinia, often used as hedging. Elaeagnus can be used as hedging. Mahonia, I've already done a post previously on Mahonia. Berberis, which is sharp and prickly. Pyracantha, commonly called firethorn. Escallonia. You have the whole of the Donnard series. You have Donnard Radiance, you have Ivy, you have Apple Blossom, and that's a really lovely kind of seaside, salt tolerant shrub. And of course Euonymus, which really has so many varied uses and so many different colours of foliage. And then you've got good old-fashioned Viburnum tinus. Now, the issue here is that all of these shrubs, even if you buy them in a small 2 or 3 litre pot and plant them, they're only going to be about 40 centimetres in the pot. So you're going to be buying a nice manageable little chap. All of them will, if left unpruned, develop to various stages over and above 5 feet. Again, that's their life cycle. That's what they're here to do. So a certain amount of responsibility comes with planting shrubs. You can't just fail to prune them to size and shape for a couple of years and then get them back, because they will have grown into each other. They will grow at different rates. So consider what they will be. And most of them will be really quite substantial within 5 years. So we all know that gardening takes patience. But you do need to be responsible and look to the future as to how large they're going to be. Now, of those, tamarisk flowers, Elaeagnus's flowers are a little bit nondescript. Mahonia, we all know they flower beautifully. Berberis flowers, right now actually, so have a good look around for that, Jenny. Pyracantha is a good all-rounder. If I took my jumper off, you'd see I am mortally scarred from my days of dealing with Pyracantha. In the springtime, they give you a blossom. It's somewhere for the birds to nest, always, because the thorns are so brutal. And then in the autumn, you have berries. Now, there are 3 different colours. You can have darts red, orange, intermedia, an orange variety. You can have Soleil d'Or, which is yellow and lower growing, smaller growing, or you can have red. That is a very nature friendly plant. Also Cotoneaster is very nature friendly, but these plants will require regular pruning and trimming to keep them neat in a small front garden. Something, Viburnum tinus, of course, that flowers beautifully. Escallonia, you have various flower colours, and that is a really good all-rounder. Now you could have hydrangea, the problem being that hydrangeas aren't necessarily, if they're highly successful, they don't really come into, if you can only have 1 or 2 of a plant from a conservation point of view, because they are sterile. So the beautiful flowers that we look at with hydrangeas, whether they're arborescens or villosa group or paniculata, or the your grandmother's flat flower heads, they're actually not flowers at all, they're leaves. Mostly I kind of go along the lines of hydrangeas are quite sterile, so not great for nature. So you could put a 1 or 2 hydrangeas in if that was your desire and what you'd like to see, but there are a significant number of shrubs to choose from. Now when it comes to flowers, I suspect that your flowers are simply being blown and dislodged at their base, so nothing tall for you, I'm afraid, Jenny. I would go with things like Erigeron carvanskianus, which is the little fleabane. It's the little, looks like the daisies you get in the lawn, but as a little cushioning clump. And they have pink mostly within them. They can be great, and if they self-sow, they can kind of carpet the ground for you. Obviously, I would go for brachyglottis is what it's called now, and that's the really great common garden shrub. It has a silver leaf. It's absolutely insistent. It doesn't back down easily, so it's really tough and hardy. The leaves are furry, which means it's hugely drought tolerant, and it has bright yellow daisy flowers on it. That is a lovely, lovely plant to have. As far as flowers are concerned, as I say, Erigeron carvanskianus, go with things like Achillea. They don't mind being blown around. Japanese anemones, they don't mind being blown around. In fact, they're often called the wind flower. Go with Bogenia, elephant's ears. They have a nice spring flowering season. If you can have a buddleia, and don't forget that they have introduced dwarf buddleias, so you could have a whole front hedge of dwarf buddleias, and if you deadhead them, the flowers keep coming. I wouldn't go for hebes, they're really not up to much these days. The breeders have gone a bit mad with them, I think. Sedum, which is the ice plant, which is a nice late flowering plant, I stock a little yellow low grower. That would be suitable for you. And don't forget armeria, which is sea thrift. Also chives. You know, everything that doesn't get huge amounts of sun. If you plant things that normally like a bit of sun, it just slows them down a little bit. It doesn't mean to say that they die. So as long as you're not planting any of your perennials into rubble, as long as you've got some soil and you put some decent mulch in the base, manure in the base, again, not from the stables, please buy that in the bag. You should have a little bit of luck. As far as seeds are concerned, which is something else you could do just to infill while you're waiting for everything to grow, why don't you try poppies, Eschscholzia, which is the Icelandic poppies. You could try love in a mist, Nigella. Pop in some Nigella. That tends to cover and overtake. Don't forget hardy geraniums. Some of those are really robust and tough. And see how you get on from there. I hope that's okay for you. So Hannah, you've got probably Acanthus mollis. A massive leaf, a massive plant, and unfortunately not something that can be dealt with easily. In my professional gardening life, it is virtually, I have to say, impossible to dig out. Incredible root system. So we've got 3 different types of acanthus. We've got Acanthus mollis, which it sounds like you have. with a large glossy leaf. We have Acanthus spinosus, which is a really serrated prickly leaf. Now these are both very, very architectural plants. They're real drama plants, but not suitable for a small garden. And obviously they're sold in garden centres and nurseries, and they're not actually letting you know that they are one of those plants that isn't suitable for a small garden. I grow and supply Acanthus hungaricus, which is like a poor relation. It's a little ground covering acanthus from Hungary, and it is tiny. It's much better behaved, but it will still cover. Even though you won't get the height, you will still get that deep-rooted system. It's not destroying your other plants, it's that it's outgrowing your other plants. Now, all I can think of, I'll rarely say this, but all I can think of is that you apply a chemical. So I'll just show you what I'm intending on using at the pasture. I've never used it before. This is not, I'm not getting paid to show you this. This is something that I'm going to try. So if I try it, I don't know if it works. I don't know. I've fully researched it, but it's by a company called Neudorf, Weed Free Plus. It's a concentrated weed killer, which is glyphosate free. So I'm really sorry, but apart from dig forever, and you know, take a break from buying other plants to put into your garden, because they are always going to be outgrown by the acanthus. Or maybe learn to love the acanthus and allow it to take over and just have acanthus everywhere. Not everybody's cup of tea, and if you're a budding gardener that's changing where you live, you know, I would just suggest that you just keep trying with it. And if you can avoid using a chemical that contains glyphosate, in my personal opinion, I think glyphosate is carcinogenic and is dangerous to human health. So I would not recommend that you use that. Okay, that's it from you. Hope I've helped. Now, the next question is going to be based on a frequently asked question to me as a gardener. So I talk to a lot of people throughout the UK, and obviously Ladybirds is gardening locally for a huge amount of people. One of the things that people always have been confused about is mulch. So if I just spend a little bit of time explaining about mulch and how we should be utilising mulch in our gardens, I think it will give you all a better idea about how to move forward. Now, we've had such a lot of rain. We've had a very, very wet winter. We all know this. And it's certainly not in any gardener's mind that there's going to be a hosepipe ban followed by a horrendous drought. I think we're very narrow-minded in the UK because, you know, we're fine. We get very hot weather and we also get very, very wet weather. You've only got to look in the wider area of Europe to know that, you know, in different parts of the world, quite local really to the United Kingdom, they're suffering with horrendous droughts, terrible droughts. Their agriculture is on the verge of collapse really, the growers. So I'm speaking about Spain and Italy and parts of France where they're just not having any rainfall, reliant on irrigation. whilst that doesn't apply to us, mulching in your garden can mitigate climate change, if you want to look at that as a thing. So after a very wet winter, people are often thinking, well, I don't need to mulch. I've got so, you know, it's so waterlogged. There is a perfectly healthy water table. All my plants and trees are going to have plenty of water for the coming season. And that's just not true. So a very, very wet winter will cause the sudden death of evergreens. It will cause excess foliage growth on everything. It can also speed up flowering. As things start to grow, they may kind of automatically go into flowering. But below ground, things change very, very, very quickly, more than we know. So when I say mulch, you've got 3 different types of mulch. You have bark chip, you have composted bark, you have farmyard manure, obviously bagged, as I've said in previous posts. You have pebbles, gravel. I tend to go with just a good blend of a bark chip which has started to really break down. I'm not so keen on the individual chips because I think songbirds, especially blackbirds, just have a great time pecking through it and putting it all over the pathways and the lawn in their search for insects. You need to do this now if you're going to do it. A mulch has to be 3 inches. I won't negotiate on that. It's the exact amount that I was recommending 25 years ago, and I'm still saying 3 inches. Not a little bit, a lot. This is why people who follow the gardeners on TV, who advise you to mulch, and you put a mulch in to keep the weeds down, lock the moisture in, and make it easier to maintain, because whilst weeds will grow over a mulch, they won't be able to develop a hearty root system. And then they say to me, well, I've failed. I've completely failed. You know, it doesn't work. Mulching is rubbish. It doesn't work. And you find out that they've put that much on. And if you're going to do that, don't bother. Don't spend your money. You need that much. It needs to cut out the light for the weeds. That's how you stop them growing. And then when they do pop through the mulch, it's very easy just to get rid of them. You need to mulch this time of year, early spring. Check your border, depending on what kind of summer we've had and what suffering the gardener has had to endure. I mean, it could have been a really wet summer, in which case you're going to think again. In the late autumn, again, you're mulching for a different reason. The autumn mulching is going to be more likely to be something that will sit on top of your soil and rot. So it will actually feed your soil. And for that reason, I would probably recommend tucking the borders in, putting them to bed at the back end of the very back end of the year with a nice 3-inch layer of a mulch that will, as opposed to solid little bark chips, rot down and actually put something back into the border. So farmyard manure is really good for that as a feed. So that's you can also do this, by the way, with grass clippings. I had a customer in Bridge years ago. We always mulched all of his borders, all of his shrubs and trees with grass clippings. And it's only if you're a very tidy gardener that you like to see bare soil that's not going to work for you. But that's perfectly acceptable. So that's mulching, and it is very important to keep things going if you can't get out there and water or you're facing a hose pipe ban. So now's the time to really start thinking about this, okay? Thanks ever so much for watching today. Any questions, if you're new to gardening or an old lady like me, just give me an email and I will do my best to answer. Take care. Bye bye.